gentlemen, and welcome back to Tech Showdown. My name is Kevin, this is my co-host Teddy, and today we're going to be talking about video memory or graphics memory or VRAM as some people put it. How much of it you actually need and what happens if you run out of it. So let's answer those first two questions then. So how much do you actually need? Well, the first thing we need to consider is what resolution you're going to be playing your games at. Now, 90% of the gamers out there are going to be gaming at 1080p. That's just the most common resolution of monitor out there, and most likely at 60 Hz. So that means ideally you want to be running a game obviously at its 1080p display and over 60 frames per second. Now probably the next would be 1440p, so 2560 by 1440p displays. I happen to have one right here right now that I'm testing, which I'm going to be doing a review of this week over on Playtech TV, the other channel I host. And this is the Asus VX24AH, which is quite a nice display, 1440p display with very small bezels on it. So I've been doing some 1440p testing as well, so we'll look into that. Now, I could do 4K testing, but honestly, I don't have a 4K display here, for one, and two, not many gamers at all game at 4K at all, so it's not really worth considering for the most part. This is just generally for the majority of you gamers out there are going to be gaming at either 1080p, and some of you will be gaming at 1440p, but very few will be at 4K because it's still a relatively new thing. Like, graphics cards are just kind of getting there in terms of being able to game at 4K, the very top ones that is, and it's kind of a little bit difficult on single card applications, that is. So let's talk about the second thing, which is what happens if you run out. So if you run out of video memory, we're going to keep this really basic. Basically what happens is your graphics card will need to get the memory from somewhere else, and it'll draw it from your system memory, so your RAM. This is fine, you're still going to be able to game stuff, it's not like the game will turn off or anything. But you'll see a significant loss in frames per second, so the frames will drop right down because the system memory is a lot slower than the video memory, and it's having to go through the PCI slot as well. It's just, yeah, it's not ideal, so you're obviously not going to want to run out of video memory. So for my testing today, I have the Asus Strix GTX 970 in there with the full 4 GB of video memory. What's that, Teddy? It only has 3.5? Oh my god. So Teddy tells me it only has 3.5 GB of memory. But Teddy's only half correct there. So a lot of people will know the controversy with the GTX 970 and say it only has 3.5 GB of RAM. Now we're not going to get all into that, but basically that's half true. It has 3.5 GB at a certain speed, and the last 500 megabytes is of a slower speed. We're not going to get into all of it, and so it still does have 4 GB, but it's not all at the same speed. So that's where the controversy comes from. And calling it, like, what was it called, RAM gate or whatever? Why do people add the gate to everything? Like with the iPhone 6 Plus, it was the bend gate and stuff for when they were bending. Why do they? I mean, there's probably people out there that don't even know why it's called, you know, whatever, gate. You know, they probably literally think it's a gate. They probably hadn't even heard of Watergate. Whatever. I just think it's stupid. Anyways, let's get into our testing and see how much video memory you actually need. So the first game we're going to do is Tomb Raider. So this is everything maxed out on all these games. And at 1080p, it used 1,296 megabytes of video memory. So, graphics memory. So, that's a decent chunk there, not too bad. Then at 1440p, it used 1,587 megabytes, or 1.5 gigabytes. So, it used a decent amount there at 1440p. However, Tomb Raider is a relatively, well, somewhat old game now, although it was very, you know, good graphics when it came out. Still is today, but not as high requirements as some of the other games we're going to be testing. Next, we're going on to Shadow of Mordor. Now, this game has some serious requirements with it. So, for some reason on this monitor, the 1080p benchmark just was really out of whack for some reason. I don't know why that was, so we're just going to forget about that one and jump straight to 1440p, the highest one anyways. and it used a whopping 3,618 megabytes of graphics memory, or VRAM. So 3.6 gigs at 1440p. Now that is a ton. So yeah, very high requirement game there. Now, one thing I will say just in between before our last one is that it's not always using a hell of a lot because the game has high requirements. And when DirectX 12 comes out, we should see this come down, I think. I mean, there's a lot of... we don't really know yet, well, at least I don't anyways, how much of an impact DirectX 12 is going to have. A lot of people are saying it's going to be huge, but I'll wait to try it for myself. So hopefully by the end of this year, or maybe even sooner, we'll be able to test all that out. Anyways, last game is Wolfenstein: The New Order. So at 1080p, it used 2,810 megabytes, and at 1440p, it used 3,042 megabytes, so about 3 gigs flat. And that was all the games I tested, because those are probably the 3 highest requirement games I own right now. But I will be getting more games down the road. Just let me finish the games I have. So what do we take from that? Well, Shadow of Mordor, I think, is in its own place, and a lot of people kind of single that one out and be like, wow, you need, you know, there's so much memory to run Shadow of Mordor, and I think it's just by itself, it just seems to use a lot. But generally, a lot of modern games at 1440p, or some of them at 1080p, will be using around the 3 gigabyte mark. A lot of them will use around 2.5 as well at 1080p. That's why things like the GTX 960 I didn't really like. 2 gigabytes I honestly don't feel is enough. 3 gigabytes I do think is enough. For 1080p gaming, 3 gigabytes should be able to get you by in like 95% of games, I'd say. Probably even more than that. 3 gigabytes is a really good amount. A 4 is even better. So what does this say about the 970 then, if we're going to include the whole RAM gate thing into it? Well, I mean, honestly, in the vast majority of games, say, at 1080p gaming, 99% of them, that 3.5, well, it's, you know, as we explained earlier, it's really 4, but 3.5 at the same speed memory is going to do you just fine. So it shouldn't be an issue for anyone out there gaming at 1080p right now, honestly. And when DirectX 12 comes out, expect it to be using less. So that should be really good. But that's just this video going over, giving you guys an idea of how much video memory, VRAM or graphics memory some of the games use and how much you really need. And that's just my opinion right now, my personal opinion, is that for 1080p gaming, I reckon 3 gigabytes is tons, and then 1440p, then maybe, yeah, like 4, or maybe, yeah, 4 should be fine these days. The full 4, like on a i9 290X or a GTX 980, should do you just fine for 1440p gaming. And that's going to round out this video. So thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to Tech Showdown if you haven't already, and leave a like if you like this video. And I want to ask you guys a question. So in the comments section below, tell me, what do you think of DirectX 12, or well, what you know about it already? What do you think? Do you think it's going to have as big of an impact as a lot of people are making it up to be? I'd like to know. And I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.